The horizon was no longer a line, but a jagged maw of white and bruised purple. The HMS Borealis moved through the high Arctic reaches not as a predator, but as a witness. She was a marvel of a forgotten age, a three-masted barque reinforced with heavy iron plating and a pulsating, steam-driven heart. Brass pipes snaked along her mahogany railings like the veins of a titan, hissing with the rhythmic breath of the great boilers deep within her belly. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the helm, his hands encased in grease-stained leather, feeling the vibrations of the ship through the wheel. To his left, the great brass compass spun erratically, confused by the magnetic anomalies of the north. The sky above was a theatrical display of celestial violence. The aurora borealis did not merely glow, it thrashed, casting sickly shades of violet and neon emerald across the deck, turning the crew's faces into ghostly masks of light and shadow. The mission was the Crown's path, a desperate search for a passage through the shifting glaciers that had claimed a dozen ships before them. But the Borealis was different. She was built to withstand the pressure of the ice, her hull shaped like an almond to slip upward when the floes tightened their grip. Yet, as the sun dipped below the edge of the world, leaving behind a twilight that refused to end, the sea began to change. The water, usually a deep, lethal black, turned into a thick, crystalline slurry. It didn't ripple, it groaned. The sound of the ship cutting through this frazil ice was like 1,000 knives scraping against a violin string. A high, piercing shriek that vibrated through the teeth of every man and woman on deck. Elias watched the barometer. It hadn't just fallen, it had collapsed, the needle pinned against the stop as if terrified of the air pressure outside. The wind, which had been a steady northern gale, suddenly vanished. In the vacuum of its absence, the silence was more terrifying than the roar. Then, this singing began. It was the sound of the glaciers, miles away, yet echoing through the water, the deep, subsonic boom of ice shells calving and collapsing into the abyss. Chief Engineer Martha emerged from the hatch, her face smudged with coal dust, her eyes wide. She reported that the pressure in the primary steam lines was spiking. The cold was so intense that the condensation was freezing inside the vents, creating a lethal buildup of pressure. The ship was fighting itself, its internal heat struggling against a cold that felt sentient. Then, the first wall appeared. It was not a wave of water, but a rogue wave of ice and slush, a slurry wall. It rose 60 feet out of the blackness, a churning mass of frozen brine and burgy bits the size of carriages. Elias didn't have time to scream. He threw the wheel hard to starboard, signaling for full steam. The Borealis groaned, her iron-shod bow rising to meet the onslaught. When the impact came, it wasn't the sound of water hitting wood. It was the sound of an explosion. Shards of ice, sharp as obsidian, rained down on the deck, shattering the reinforced glass of the bridge. The brass steam pipes along the port side buckled and burst, venting high-pressure steam that instantly turned into a blinding white mist in the negative 40-degree air. The ship didn't just tilt, she was shoved sideways, her keel screaming as it dragged against the submerged base of the ice wave. As the ship righted herself, the true scale of the disaster became clear. The port-side lifeboats, masterpieces of oak and copper, had been reduced to splinters. The rigging was coated in a layer of clear ice 6 inches thick, doubling the weight of the masts and making the vessel dangerously top-heavy. Every rope was a frozen rod, every pulley was a seized gear. Martha's team scrambled across the slick, heaving deck, wielding steam hoses like flamethrowers to melt the ice from the primary winches. But the north was not finished. The sky turned a shade of gray that looked like forged steel. In the distance, the aurora began to pulse in sync with the crashing of the waves, a rhythmic, haunting heartbeat that suggested the storm was just beginning to find its rhythm. The second wave was the Mother of Ice. It was a tectonic event disguised as a swell. It didn't just tower over the masts, it blotted out the stars. It was a 100-foot wall of black water and white foam, carrying within it the ancient debris of a collapsed glacier. Elias looked up and saw a 3-ton block of blue ice suspended in the crest of the wave, hovering above them like a falling moon. He locked his arms through the spokes of the wheel and closed his eyes. The impact was a total sensory blackout. The Borealis was submerged, the weight of the ocean pressing down on her decks with the force of a mountain. Below decks, the rivets began to pop like pistol shots. The iron plating of the hull groaned, the metal complaining as it was squeezed by the thermal shock and the hydraulic pressure. Water burst through the primary portholes, a freezing torrent that swept through the mess hall and into the engine room. Martha stood her ground, her boots submerged in freezing brine, as she hammered the safety valves open. The engines were screaming now, a mechanical death rattle. The heat from the boilers met the incoming ice water, creating a chaotic explosion of steam and soot. On the deck, the destruction was absolute. The primary steam chimney, a towering pillar of black iron and brass, snapped at its base. It fell with a slow, majestic horror, crushing the midship bridge and sliding into the sea, taking with it the ship's ability to breathe. Without the chimney, the fires in the boilers began to choke, and the heartbeat of the Borealis slowed to a crawl. The ship was now a ghost. She was no longer a vessel of exploration. She was a carcass. The masts, once proud and laden with canvas, were broken stubs, draped in the tattered ribbons of sails that looked like the skin of a flayed giant. The freezing fog, the sea smoke, rolled in, thick and suffocating. It coated everything in a layer of rime. The eyelashes of the crew, the brass of the compass, the leather of the wheel. Elias stood alone at the helm, the wheel no longer connected to anything, spinning freely in his hands. He looked out over his ship and saw the ice beginning to win. The slurry was hardening. The ocean was literally freezing solid around the hull, the pancake ice fusing into a single, unbreakable sheet. The Borealis let out one final, long groan, the sound of the keel finally snapping under the vertical pressure. She began to settle into the ice, not sinking so much as being absorbed. The orange glow of the last oil lanterns flickered in the cabins, casting long, dancing shadows against the frosted windows. One by one, those lights went out. The steam vents let out a final, mournful hiss, a white plume that vanished into the purple dark. The crew, huddled in their fur coats, watched as the water rose to meet the deck, not with a roar, but with a quiet, inevitable click of ice crystals forming. The ship was being preserved in a tomb of her own making, a steampunk relic destined to spend eternity in the deep, silent cradle of the North. As the sun finally teased the horizon 20 hours later, the storm had vanished. The sea was an infinite, flat mirror of white and gray. There were no waves, no wind, no sound. The HMS Borealis was gone. In her place, a single tattered flag, the blue and gold of the Exploration Guild, poked out from a jagged pressure ridge of ice. Beside it, a single brass porthole frame lay on the surface, catching the first golden rays of the sun. The North had taken its tribute. The silence was absolute, a cold, majestic peace that stretched from the edge of the ice to the end of the world. The ghost ship had found its final harbor, buried beneath the beautiful, lethal indifference of the Arctic.